She wished for a grave instead of a miracle. What happened next saved an entire town. The wind in rural Virginia often whispers stories through the ancient oaks, rustling leaves and stirring secrets in the quiet corners of the land. But for Maria, the wind only carried the hollow ache of loneliness. She was the sole owner and caretaker of the Miller family cemetery, a place of silent sentinels and stone angels, nestled on a rolling hill just outside of town. To most, this land was a final resting place, a serene tableau of granite and memory. To Maria, it was a mirror of her own heart. A year ago, her husband, Mark, had been taken in a sudden brutal car accident. He was the one who laughed while digging graves, who told her stories about the people they were burying, and who had promised her a life of peace on this land. Now, all that remained were the ghosts of his promises and the crushing weight of a business she never wanted to run alone. She didn't bury the dead. She buried her own grief with every spade of earth. And some nights, in the suffocating silence of her home, Maria Miller, the last in a long line of gravekeepers, found herself wishing that the next empty plot she dug would be for her. Before the silence, there was Mark. She had met him while working a summer job in town, a city girl from Richmond with a sarcastic wit and a love for fast-paced life. Mark was her complete opposite. He was a man of the earth, his hands calloused from work, his laugh as deep and rumbling as a passing storm. He wasn't slick or fast-talking. He was patient and kind. When he told her he was a gravedigger, she had laughed. But then he brought her here to the cemetery. He showed her the artistry of the old stone monuments, the way the sunlight caught the names etched into the granite. He told her stories about the people who rested here, farmers and schoolteachers, veterans and mothers. He spoke of his work not as an end, but as a final, loving act of service. He saw himself as a caretaker, a guardian of the last quiet histories. Maria, to her own surprise, fell in love not just with him, but with the quiet dignity of his world. They married, and she found a peace she had never known in the city's rush. Their life was a simple, beautiful routine of early mornings, shared coffee, and the comforting rhythm of their work. The day it all ended was a perfect, cloudless Tuesday. Mark had left for a supply run, kissing her on the forehead, as he always did, his truck's engine humming a familiar low tune. "Don't dig anything without me," he had joked, a twinkle in his eye. His humor was as dry as the Virginia summer. The phone call came 3 hours later. It was the county sheriff, his voice thick with a forced professionalism that couldn't hide the grim truth. Maria didn't scream, didn't cry. She just stood there, her hands trembling as she held the phone. The world tilted on its axis. She drove to the scene, her mind a fog of disbelief. The wrecked truck, the shattered glass, the police lights flashing. A grotesque, silent symphony against the green fields. But it was Mark's absence that was the loudest thing. It was an emptiness that swallowed every sound, every sight, every feeling. It was a vacuum cold and absolute, and it had entered her life to stay in the months that followed. Grief was her only companion. It was a physical thing, a crushing weight that sat on her chest and made it hard to breathe. The cemetery, once a place of shared love, became a monument to his absence. She would walk the rows of tombstones, her hand on a cool marble angel, and remember Mark's calloused fingers running over the same stone, his voice a low hum as he talked about the history of the families laid to rest. Each memory was a stab of pain, a reminder of what she had lost. The neighbors, well-meaning as they were, only made it worse. They came with casseroles and offers of prayer, their voices soft with pity. Mrs. Henderson, a woman who lived across the street, would stop her and say, "He's with Jesus now, Maria. He's with all the saints." Maria would just nod, her lips pressed into a thin, grim line. She wanted to scream, to ask this woman how she could believe in a God that left children fatherless and wives widowed. What kind of a God was that? A God who sat by while a good man was taken in the blink of an eye. She saw their faith not as a comfort, but as a cruel delusion. A lie they told themselves to make the pain manageable. She wanted none of it. She wanted the truth, and the truth was this. Mark was gone, and she was alone. It was more than just grief, though. The cemetery itself was dying. Maria, lacking her husband's warmth and reputation, had lost all her clients. People who once flocked to the Miller Cemetery for its quiet dignity now went elsewhere. Maria was too consumed by her own sorrow to care, and the business dwindled to nothing. At the same time, a large property developer from the city, a man named Mr. Harrington, had his eyes on the land. He was a man as relentless as a drought. He had threatened lawsuits, claiming the family trust that protected the land was an outdated, unenforceable document. "It's a graveyard, Maria," he had told her on the phone, his voice slick with condescension. "It's not making you any money. It's prime real estate. Think of what you could do with the money." He offered a sum that would solve all her problems and let her escape this place that had become a prison. But a family trust, a document 100 years old, forbade the sale of the land, demanding it remain a cemetery for as long as a Miller lived to tend it. Maria's grandfather, a man of profound faith, had written it with a prayer and a promise. May this ground forever be a place of hallowed rest and a testament to the life that comes after. Now, those words felt like a curse. Harrington's legal letters piled up on her kitchen table, a constant physical reminder of her failure. She had no new burials, no new clients, just dwindling savings and the specter of a legal battle she knew she would lose. The weight of her dead husband, her dying business, and her shattered faith was heavier than any coffin. And so, on a gray October evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, casting a long shadow over the cemetery, Maria drove her old pickup truck into the cemetery, not to tend to the living, but to confess to the dead. She parked near a hill where her grandfather and great-grandfather were buried, far from Mark's fresh grave. She needed to tell the men who had lived and died by this land that she was a failure. She got out of the truck and grabbed her spade, not for a client, but for herself. She walked to an empty plot, one she had been saving, a small hillock with a perfect view of the setting sun. She plunged the spade into the soft earth, its cold handle a familiar weight in her hands. The rhythmic sound of soil being turned was a comfort, a small act of purpose in a life that had lost all meaning. As she dug, she thought of Mark. She thought of his laugh, of the way he would kiss her forehead before leaving for a long day, of work, of the way he made her feel safe, cherished. All that was gone, all that was left was this empty plot, this heavy spade, this broken heart. She dug for hours, the moon rising a sliver of silver in the darkening sky. The hole grew deeper, a silent testament to her despair. The developer's threats, the empty bank account, the loneliness, they all seemed to press down on her, pushing her deeper into the earth. She didn't want a miracle. She didn't want hope. She wanted rest. She wanted to be buried here, in this place that she had once loved, and that had now broken her. She wanted to be finally, truly done. She wanted to be with Mark, in the silence, in the cold, and in the dark. The thought was not one of fear, but of profound, quiet peace. She was a woman who had given up on life, and a woman who was ready to be a part of the earth. She was a woman who was no longer fighting, but a woman who had surrendered. And in that surrender, she was, for the first time in a long time, at peace. Her arms ached, her back screamed in protest, but she ignored the pain. She dug with a silent, desperate energy, her shovel scraping against the soil, the sound a metronome of her despair. The hole grew wider and deeper, a final, unsaid prayer. She was a woman who was tired of fighting, tired of living, and tired of being alone. She was a woman who had lost everything, and a woman who had nothing left to lose. And in that moment, as she stood in the grave she had been digging for herself, Maria Miller, the last of a long line of gravekeepers, knew that she was ready to be a part of the silence, a part of the earth, and a part of the past. The stage was set. The prayers had ended. And what was to come was not of her own making, but of a different, more powerful hand. The hand of a miracle. The night was cool and silent, the kind of silence that falls only over a place of profound rest. It was a silence that carried weight, a stillness so complete that every small sound felt like a grand intrusion. Maria's breath plumed in the cold air, a fleeting ghost in the moonlight. The cemetery was vast and still, the tombstones casting long dark shadows in the silver glow of the moon. The air smelled of damp earth and late-blooming flowers, a scent that Mark used to say was the smell of peace. She stood in the grave she had been digging, her body exhausted, her mind a blank slate of surrender. The rhythmic sound of her spade had long since ceased, replaced by the thrumming of crickets and the whisper of the wind through the tall grass. She felt a strange detachment from herself, a sense of peace that only comes from utter surrender. She was no longer Mark's wife, no longer the cemetery owner, no longer a woman fighting for her life. She was just a body, a tired body, waiting for the end. The thought brought a strange, bitter comfort. And then she heard it. A sound so impossibly beautiful, so completely out of place in a graveyard that she froze. It was a woman's voice, a chorus of one, singing a melody she had never heard. It was not a hymn, not a song from the radio, but something ancient, ethereal, and pure. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once, floating on the wind, weaving through the tombstones, filling the air with a breathtaking clarity. The song was a cascade of pure, melodic notes, a sound that spoke not with words, but with a profound, unearthly love. It was a melody that felt both familiar and impossible, as if it had been a memory she had forgotten and was only now remembering. Maria's hands tightened on the spade handle. She told herself it was her mind, playing tricks on her, a side effect of grief and exhaustion. She had not slept in days. This was not real. But the singing grew stronger, and as it did, a soft golden light began to shimmer in the distance. It was not the light of a car or a street lamp, but a light that seemed to pulse from within, a living, breathing warmth that defied the cold of the night. It was radiant, and as it grew stronger, an intoxicating fragrance of roses, a scent that was both familiar and impossible, filled the air. A scent so pure it seemed to soothe her aching heart. Maria's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drum against her chest. She dropped the spade, its metal clanging against the side of the grave, a shocking intrusion into the sacred silence. She stood up slowly, her body trembling, and stared. In the distance, between a cluster of old oak trees, the light intensified. It wasn't blinding, but warm, soft, and radiant. And within the light, a figure began to take shape. It was a woman. She was clad in a flowing white dress, its fabric shimmering with an inner light, her hair covered by a sky-blue mantle that seemed to be woven from the very fabric of the heavens. Her face was serene, not with the empty peace of a statue, but with a profound, lived-in compassion. Her eyes, filled with a love that felt older than the mountains, were fixed on Maria alone. Her hands were folded in prayer, a gesture of silent devotion, and from her entire being emanated a presence that was both powerful and gentle. The singing, so impossibly clear before, now seemed to be emanating from the woman herself, a living, breathing harmony that spoke directly to Maria's broken heart. Maria sank back against the cold, damp earth, her legs suddenly unable to hold her. The woman was not a ghost. She was not a dream. She was real. The figure did not move, but her hands, still folded, lifted slightly and pointed. She was pointing to an unmarked grave, an old, forgotten plot, just a few feet away from where Maria was digging. It was a small, unassuming mound of earth, a place of no importance. Maria followed the gesture, her eyes darting from the glowing woman to the silent, dark earth she was pointing at. And as she did, the singing faded and the light dimmed, receding back into the night as if it had never been. The figure was gone. The only sound now was the wind whispering through the trees and the frantic pounding of Maria's own heart. She sat there for a long time, unable to move, unable to speak, her mind racing. What had she just seen? What had she just heard? It had been too real, too vivid to be a hallucination. But it was impossible. Miracles were for saints, for people with faith. They were not for a bitter, broken woman digging her own grave in the middle of a dying cemetery. As the first light of dawn broke, Maria finally stirred. Her body was stiff and cold, her mind a whirlwind of confusion. She got up, grabbed her spade, and slowly, numbly, filled the grave she had been digging. The act of returning the earth to its proper place felt like a silent vow. She had seen something, and it had scared her more than her own despair. She tried to convince herself it was a dream, a trick of the mind. But the image of the woman, in blue, her gentle eyes, her folded hands, and her unwavering gaze at that small, unmarked grave was burned into her memory. She walked over to the spot and stared at the earth. It was just a small mound, like any other in the cemetery. But something was different. She had to know. With trembling hands, she knelt and began to brush away the leaves and dirt. Her heart was pounding, a silent drum in her chest. And then her fingers brushed against something hard and metallic. She dug frantically, scraping away the topsoil, until she found it, a small sealed tin box. It was old, corroded, and looked as if it had been buried there for decades. She sat on the cold earth, holding the box, its weight a new reality in her hands. The sun was now fully up, casting a golden light over the tombstones, and in that light, Maria saw the name inscribed on the lid of the box. Miller. The tin box, corroded and old, was not locked. Maria, her hand shaking, pried open the lid. Inside, wrapped in a brittle piece of parchment, was a folded document. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. It was a deed. But not just any deed. It was a legal deed, 100 years old, that clearly stated that this piece of land had been given to the first miller to be a cemetery, and that the trust could not be legally challenged. Her grandfather, a man she had known in her childhood, had written a note on the back, a note in his own hand with a familiar, firm script. It read, "To my descendants. This land is our life. It is not our possession. It is a testament to the promise that life will always return. I give this deed to you, to be found when the ground needs it most, for a time of trouble, when faith is low." Maria gasped, the parchment rustling in her hands. This was a second deed, a legal document hidden away for a century that completely nullified Mr. Harrington's lawsuit. He had no claim. He had no power. The cemetery was hers. Her mind reeled. The deed, the note, the vision, the singing. It was too much to process. It couldn't be a coincidence. But how? She had not told anyone about the vision. She had kept the box and the deed a secret. She just knew that her business was safe, at least for now. But then, a few days later, a strange thing happened. The story of her discovery had spread through the town like wildfire. A local paper ran a headline, "Miracle at Miller Cemetery. Lost deed found." The town was abuzz, but it was not just the deed. A young boy, a neighbor who had seen Maria that night, told his mother he had seen a lady in blue standing in the cemetery, surrounded by light. The rumor, fueled by the boy's innocent testimony and the impossible discovery of the deed, took on a life of its own. People began to come to the cemetery, not to mourn, but to pray. They would kneel by the unmarked grave where Maria had found the deed, leaving flowers and small notes of thanks. Maria watched from a distance, her heart a tangled mess of confusion and disbelief. She wanted to yell at them, to tell them that this was not a place for prayer, that it was just a graveyard. But she couldn't bring herself to do it. The town's quiet devotion was a silent reproach to her own bitterness. One day, a woman approached her, a woman who had lost her husband to cancer, a woman Maria had seen crying at the cemetery a few months ago. "I heard what happened, Maria," she said, her eyes shining with tears. "My son, he's a stonemason. He told me he'd like to help you, for free. He wants to help you turn a piece of the land into a garden. We'll call it a resurrection garden. We'll plant flowers and herbs and trees. We'll make it a place of life, a place of peace. I think it's what she would want." The woman's voice was filled with a quiet certainty that Maria had lost a long time ago. Maria stared at her, speechless. She was a woman who had watched her husband die of a slow, agonizing disease. A woman who had every right to be angry, to be bitter, to be broken. But here she was, offering to turn a graveyard into a garden. Maria wanted to refuse, to say no, to shut the world out, but she couldn't. Not after what she had seen. Not after what she had found. The project began slowly, a few people at a time, but within weeks, it had become a town-wide effort. Men and women, young and old, came to the cemetery with shovels and gardening tools. The stonemason, true to his word, built small stone benches and a stone archway leading into the garden. A local artist carved a wooden cross, not of a dying man, but of a triumphant, living Christ. The work was tireless, but the people worked with a joy and a purpose that Maria had never seen. They were not just planting flowers. They were planting hope. Maria watched them, her heart a stone, her mind a fortress of doubt. She knew she had no right to feel this way. She should be grateful. She should be happy. But all she felt was a strange, silent pain. A part of her was still locked in her own private grief. A part of her still angry at the world. She still didn't believe in miracles, and she certainly didn't believe in God. She believed in science, in reason, in the cold, hard reality of death. But the people were not listening to her cynicism. They were listening to a different song, a different melody. And as she watched them, Maria began to realize that the miracle was not just the deed or the garden, but the quiet, persistent way that hope was refusing to die. The very ground she had wanted for a grave was now the place where an entire town was finding new life. The story of the lost deed and the glowing woman did not remain Maria's secret for long. In a small town, a miracle is an impossible secret to keep. The news spread first by a whisper, a frantic call between neighbors, then by the quiet reverence of a Sunday morning sermon. Soon after, it exploded into a headline in the local paper. "Miracle at Miller Cemetery. Lost deed found after townspeople claimed to see heavenly vision." The article, written with a mixture of professional skepticism and local awe, was a match to a fuse. By the time it was delivered to every doorstep, the town was already abuzz. The most powerful part of the story, however, was told by a child. A young boy named Thomas, who lived next door to the cemetery, had told his mother with wide, innocent eyes that he saw a lady in blue standing in the cemetery, surrounded by light. The mother, a sensible woman who believed in a firm God, but not in public spectacles, was skeptical. "Honey, it was late," she had said, trying to rationalize it away. "You were probably tired," but Thomas insisted. "She was beautiful, Mommy. She was singing." The rumor, fueled by the boy's innocent testimony and the impossible discovery of the deed, took on a life of its own, becoming a living, breathing thing that rippled through the community and beyond. The fact that a child, who had no reason to lie or invent such a tale, had seen it, was an undeniable piece of evidence that resonated with a purity no adult could replicate. The town's initial reaction was a mixture of stunned awe and profound confusion. The local minister, a kind man who had tried and failed to comfort Maria in her grief, stood in his pulpit on Sunday and spoke with a cautious but moved sincerity. "Brothers and sisters," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I do not claim to understand what has transpired on the Miller land. But I do know this. A truth was brought to light in the dark, and a life was spared from ruin. Let us not question the means, but give thanks for the grace." His words gave a sense of direction to the town's wonder, and soon people began to come to the cemetery not for a funeral, but for a pilgrimage. They would park their cars on the side of the road, walk up the hill, and stand in quiet reverence. By the unmarked grave where Maria had found the deed, their hands clasped in prayer. They came with small notes of thanks and bouquets of wildflowers picked from their own gardens. A few even knelt, their knees pressing into the damp, cold earth, whispering a silent prayer or a simple plea for their own lives. Maria watched from a distance, a silent, bitter observer from her kitchen window. Her heart was a tangled mess of confusion and disbelief. She wanted to yell at them, to tell them that this was not a place for prayer, that it was just a graveyard, a place of endings, not beginnings. But she couldn't bring herself to do it. The town's quiet devotion was a silent reproach to her own bitterness, a living monument to a faith she had lost and now saw in others. The next act of grace came from a place of immense grief. One day, a woman approached her, a woman who had lost her husband to cancer, a woman Maria had seen crying at the cemetery a few months ago. Her name was Mrs. Hayes. She walked with the quiet dignity of a person who had weathered a storm but had not been broken by it. "I heard what happened, Maria," she said, her eyes shining with tears. "My son, he's a stonemason. He told me he'd like to help you, for free. He wants to help you turn a piece of the land into a garden. We'll call it a resurrection garden. We'll plant flowers and herbs and trees. We'll make it a place of life, a place of peace. I think it's what she would want." The woman's voice was filled with a quiet certainty that Maria had lost a long time ago. Maria stared at her, speechless. She was a woman who had watched her husband die of a slow, agonizing disease, a woman who had every right to be angry, to be bitter, to be broken. But here she was, offering to turn a graveyard into a garden. Maria wanted to refuse, to say no, to shut the world out, but she couldn't. Not after what she had seen. Not after what she had found. The project began slowly, a few people at a time. The stonemason, a gentle man named Sam with hands as strong and weathered as his face, was the first. He started by building a stone archway at the entrance, a simple but beautiful monument that read, "The Resurrection Garden." He worked with a quiet, patient energy, his hammer and chisel a soft rhythm against the background of the wind. After that, it was a slow, beautiful trickle that became a flood. Within weeks, it had become a town-wide effort. Men and women, young and old, came to the cemetery with shovels and gardening tools. The air, which had once smelled of damp earth and rot, now smelled of fresh soil and blooming flowers. A local artist, a man with a wild beard and a gentle soul, carved a wooden cross, not of a dying man, but of a triumphant, living Christ. Young teenagers, who had once spent their weekends in sullen boredom, now came with their parents, pulling weeds and planting seeds. The work was tireless, but the people worked with a joy and a purpose that Maria had never seen. They were not just planting flowers, they were planting hope. They were turning a place of death into a testament to life. The resurrection garden blossomed in a way Maria could not have imagined. The soil, once cold and silent, was now alive with color and fragrance. The scent of roses and lily filled the air, a living testament to the town's unwavering faith. But for Maria, the peace of the garden was still a painful mirror. She watched the people come, not to mourn, but to be with their loved ones in a way she could not understand. They would sit on the benches, their heads bowed, talking to the dead as if they were still alive. It was a simple act, one that had been lost to her in her grief. She would see old men with calloused hands sit on a stone bench and talk to their wives, their voices a low, gentle hum against the background of the wind. She would see children with small, curious hands planting flowers for a grandmother. They had never met, their faces alight with a joy that was both innocent and profound. And she would feel a pang of something she hadn't felt in a long time, compassion, a small, quiet crack in the stone of her heart. She knew she had no right to feel this way. She should be grateful. She should be happy. But all she felt was a strange, silent pain. A part of her was still locked in her own private grief, a part of her still angry at the world. She still didn't believe in miracles, and she certainly didn't believe in God. She believed in science, in reason, in the cold, hard reality of death. But the people were not listening to her cynicism. They were listening to a different song, a different melody. And as she watched them, Maria began to realize that the miracle was not just the deed or the garden, but the quiet, persistent way that hope was refusing to die. The very ground she had wanted for a grave was now the place where an entire town was finding new life. One evening, as the sun began to set, casting long, peaceful shadows over the tombstones, Maria found herself walking through the garden. The air was thick with the scent of lily and roses. She saw Mrs. Hayes, the widow, sitting on a bench in the garden, her head bowed, her hands folded in prayer. She wasn't crying, but her face was serene, a quiet dignity in her grief. Maria watched her and felt a profound, quiet need to be near her. She walked over and sat down beside her, not speaking, just being present. The woman looked at her and smiled. "He loves this place," she said, as if she were speaking of a living person. "He loves the flowers and the sun and the quiet." Maria, her voice a raw whisper, asked, How can you still believe? How can you still feel so much peace?" The woman took her hand and said, "Because I know where he is. He's not in the ground, Maria. He's with her, and she's with us. I feel her presence here, in the garden. I feel her peace. She did not leave him, and she did not leave us." Maria wanted to cry. The woman's faith was a thing of impossible beauty, a light in the darkness. But for Maria, it was a light that she could not, would not, touch. She was afraid. Afraid that, if she let go of her anger, her bitterness, her doubt, she would lose the only thing she had left, her grief. But the garden had a quiet way of seeping into your soul. Slowly, Maria found herself tending to the flowers, pulling weeds and watering the beds, not out of a sense of duty, but because she felt a strange, quiet comfort in the work. The rhythmic motion of her hands, the feel of the cool, damp earth, the scent of the roses, it was a balm to her broken spirit. One afternoon, she found herself standing before her husband's grave, and a tear, the first she had shed in months, fell. She knelt, her hands folded in her lap, and she whispered to him, not with anger, but with a raw, painful honesty. "Mark, I miss you. I'm so angry. I don't know what to do." And in the silence, as if from nowhere, she felt a gentle peace wash over her, a quiet warmth that she had not felt since the day he had died. It was not a voice or a light, but a feeling of being held, a feeling of being loved. She sat there for a long time, the tears streaming down her face, a silent confession of her surrender. It was not a miracle of the grand theatrical kind, but a miracle of the heart, a small, quiet act of grace. The very ground she had wanted for a grave was now the place where an entire town and a broken woman were finding new life. The weeks that followed the garden's completion were a slow, quiet pilgrimage for Maria herself. She would spend her mornings there, not out of a sense of duty, but because a strange, undeniable peace had settled into the land. The place that had once been a mirror of her grief was now a testament to her nascent hope. But still, the final act of surrender eluded her. She had accepted the gift of the garden, the kindness of the town, and the impossible deed. But she had not yet accepted her own vulnerability. Her bitterness, a fortress she had built around her heart, had cracks in it, but it was still standing. One evening, as the sun began to set, casting a golden light over the tombstones, Maria found herself walking to Mark's grave. She had not been there in weeks. Her grief, which had been a constant howling presence, had now become a quiet ache, a dull, manageable throb. She stood before his headstone, a simple granite monument, and a profound, raw honesty surged through her. She was not a woman who believed in talking to the dead. She was a woman who believed in the cold, hard reality of death. But in this place, in this light, in this moment, she had to try. "Mark," she whispered, her voice a raw, painful rasp. "I miss you. I'm so angry. I'm so angry." The words, which she had held back for a year, poured out of her like a dam breaking. She confessed her rage at God, her resentment of the town, her doubt, her bitterness, and her profound, unbearable loneliness. She told him about the terrible silence that had followed his death, and the way she had felt like she was drowning in a sea of despair. She told him about the lawyer and the lawsuits and the empty bank account. She told him about the grave she had been digging for herself and the deep, dark relief she had felt when she was in it. She confessed everything. She was a woman who had given up on life, a woman who had nothing left to lose. As the tears streamed down her face, she knelt, her hands folded in her lap, and she surrendered. She didn't know who she was surrendering to. It wasn't to a God she was sure of, or a saint she believed in. She was surrendering to the vast, incomprehensible love that had found her in the dark. She whispered, "I don't know why this happened to me. I don't know why you were taken. But I can't do this alone anymore. I don't want to be alone anymore." And in the silence that followed, a profound, gentle peace washed over her. It was not a voice or a light, but a feeling of being held, a feeling of being loved. It was a quiet warmth that she had not felt since the day he had died. It was the first time she had been still in a year, and the first time her soul had felt at rest. The moment was a turning point. Maria, the woman who had wished for her own grave, had been found. She was no longer just a caretaker of the dead, but a living testament to the resurrection. She was no longer a prisoner of her past, but a guardian of a new, beautiful truth. 5 years later, the Miller family cemetery was no longer a quiet, unassuming place. It was a beacon. It had been officially named the Resurrection Gardens, and a small shrine had been built where Maria had found the deed. A simple stone monument with a statue of the Virgin Mary, a gift from the grateful town. People came from all over the country, not just to visit, but to pray. They came seeking comfort, healing, and a sense of peace that they could not find anywhere else. The cemetery had become a living, breathing testament to the power of grace. Maria was a different woman. Her face, once etched with bitterness and grief, was now soft and serene. She was no longer just a caretaker. She was a guide, a silent witness to the miracles that unfolded every day on the land she had once tried to bury. She would sit with the grieving, and she would tell them her story, not of a woman who had seen a miracle, but of a woman who had been found by love. She would tell them about the singing, the light, the deed, and the garden. And she would end her story the same way every time. "I don't know why she came. I don't know why she chose this place. All I know is that she found me when I was at my lowest, and she brought me back to life." The town had been changed by the experience. The local community center, once a place of potlucks and bake sales, was now a place of prayer groups and service. People who had been strangers now reached out to one another, offering a helping hand, a listening ear, a quiet word of comfort. The town's faith, once a private affair, had become a public testimony, a vibrant, living thing that had been born out of tragedy and despair. Even Mr. Harrington, the developer who had threatened to sue her, had come to the cemetery. He had not said a word, but he had left a single white lily on the stone bench in the garden. A small, silent apology, a testament to the power of a miracle that had humbled even the most hardened of men. One evening, as the sun was setting, Maria walked to Mark's grave. She placed a single rose on his headstone, a red, fragrant tribute to a love that had never died. She knelt, her hands folded in her lap, and she began to pray. Not the bitter prayers of a grieving wife, but the quiet, humble prayers of a woman. Of faith. She thanked God for her life, for her town, for the peace that she had found. And she thanked her husband for the love that he had given her, a love that had never left her. She looked up at the sky, a deep, endless blue, and she felt a presence, a warm, gentle presence that she had felt 100 times before. A silent, unwavering love that had been with her every step of the way. She was no longer alone. She was not the last of a long line of gravekeepers, but the first of a new one, a caretaker of life, a guardian of hope. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden light over the resurrection gardens, Maria Miller, the woman who had wished for her own grave, knew that she had finally, truly come home. The place that was once a testament to death was now a testament to life. And so the story of the Miller Cemetery reminds us that even in the darkest of nights, a light can break through. That even in the deepest despair, a new life can take root. That even in a place of endings, a new beginning can be found. It is a story of a woman who was broken and a town that was dying, and a miracle that gave them both a second chance. It is a story of a silent witness, a lost deed, and a garden that bloomed from a graveyard. It is a story of hope, of faith, and of the unyielding power of a mother's love. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to walk with us on this path of grace. Please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel, Graced by the Virgin Mary, so you won't miss the next story of hope, faith, and transformation. Together, let's keep sharing the light that changes lives.